Hey, how's it going, everybody? Sarasota Tim. How are you 111,000 and counting beautiful souls doing out there? It's time for evening chat. It's the holiday time. I'm feeling much better. I got my elixir. I only did a half a teaspoon, so don't think I'm on anything. Um, I don't even feel the codeine, but it worked. And instead of doing two, I tried one little whatever that thing is that you suck it up with, which is equal to a half a teaspoon. I mean, I'm already on the mend, so maybe I didn't need as much as I could have used yesterday. But if I need any more, I'm looking at it. So I was just on the phone with one of my subscribers. Everybody knows him. And we were reminiscing and talking. He calls me every night, as many of them do. And I said, you know what? I'm going to make a video about that. I made a video once before, several months ago, reminiscing about Christmas, about how I used to celebrate Christmas. And so many of you in my community are my age or older, and you remembered celebrating. I was surprised, and not really, that you celebrated Christmas the same way I did growing up. And it was old timey. It was different, and we believed in Santa Claus, and things weren't wrapped, and we woke up, and all these things were there that Santa left, and on and on. I'm not going to talk about that. We talked about that once, and that was a great video. And I'm glad a lot of you shared back with me in the comments about how I'm holding my microphone, how you celebrated the same way. So tonight, when I was talking to one of the subscribers that you all know, I don't need to mention names, it doesn't matter. But we were talking about, I was telling him about something that I used to do when I lived in California. And when I lived in San Diego, California years ago, and I lived there actually several times in my life, I moved when the rent came due. I think I told you guys. I've lived in Florida and San Diego. I even moved to Atlanta like twice or three times. But I moved to San Diego, and I was living there when I was young, and I was married there and all that. I don't know, countless times. But I got as much experience with Southern California as I do Southern Florida. Southern Florida is probably my home. That's where I went to junior high and high school. Also married here, and my children were born here, and except my daughter, she was born in California. So anyway, back to the point. Let's talk about how things used to be. We were talking, and I got on the subject of, let me try to remember, because that's why I wanted to make this video. I don't want to forget. Well, that was the second thing I want to talk about. The first thing I was talking about, well, maybe I'll remember when I talk about what I'm remembering now. Who in California, if you live in California, you'd have to probably live there to know about this, ever heard of the Grunion Run? You say, what is that? Oh, I know what I was going to talk about. It has to do with the beach. So, grunion are little sardine-looking fish. And if I remember right, because I did do it at least twice, maybe three times, no more than that, it was a thing in the 70s. If it was a full moon and a high tide, I'm going to say it was high tide or low tide, because when the waves come up, might have been low tide, and when the water goes back into the ocean, these little fish would swim up with the water in the shallowest of water, and they would wiggle on the sand. They'd get stuck on it back to the water. They'd make it, but that was an opportunity to catch them. And it was always at midnight, 1 or 2 in the morning, when they would come up, and you would eat them. They were like delicacies. They were just, I don't know, little sardines. We would cook them. I can't remember how you cooked them, but I guess if you didn't eat the head, they were kind of like a finger food, like a sardine or something. But they were the grunion, and that was, an old timey thing that we used to do. But what led me to talking about that is this. Now, this is what takes me back to the way things used to be in our country. And I'm talking about the 70s. When I lived in San Diego, I started thinking about this when I was telling my friend I bought that thing at Buc-ee's, that propane fire pit that puts out 58,000 BTU that's in the box still, and my Christmas tree. I'm feeling much better. I'll have to get on the ball tomorrow, right? And get that tree up anyway. I came home tonight. Now, we're having very cold weather. Where's my drugs? We're having very cold weather starting tonight and even colder tomorrow and the next day and for the foreseeable future in the evening, which is lovely. But tomorrow it's going to be like 44. So I come home tonight and there's a little wind out there and it was kind of cold. And I said, dang, Tim, you should get out your... But I don't want to be out there with the throat thing. So you should get out that propane fire pit. Fire it up. 58,000 BTUs, get you a chair and sit around your little fire pit. And I started thinking, it's cold out here. I have to set it up before it gets real cold and it's daylight, and have it ready. I can go out there and just fire it up. That's what's going to be great about that thing is I can just take a match. There's not going to be go light a fire starter log or some wood and wait an hour before the flame gets going, and it's smoke everywhere and ashes coming up and burning my awning or lighting on somebody else or their cars or I got no use for that. Plus, I don't like the smoke to get on me. This propane thing is going to be the ticket. And it's portable. I can throw it in the back of that truck and take it somewhere. I can go over here to Nathan Benderson Park. I can go anywhere I want. Fire that baby up, and pull out my chair. Maybe some sweet little thing will walk up and say, hey, can I sit next to your fire? So we were talking about that. And then I was telling him on the phone, I said, let me tell you what I used to do. It just made me remember. In California, on the beaches, see, I'm getting to it now, the old timey days, we had fire rings, and fires were completely legit and legal to have on the beaches in San Diego. These concrete fire pits on the sand were no less than 12 feet in diameter. They were huge rings. And nightly, people would come with pallets, boards, sticks, wood, whatever would burn, and have these fires. And here's what would happen. You didn't own that. I mean, it's a big fire pit. You didn't want to own it. People would come up and contribute some wood and like, hey, how you doing? And get acquainted. Maybe it was somebody you've already seen before there. Maybe somebody would show up with an acoustic guitar. In fact, that was quite often. And would start strumming the guitar. It was a little hippie-ish, yeah, and it was the 70s. And yeah, we had bell bottoms and longer hair and, we were surfers and beach bum kind of people, and we weren't nomadic. We lived at home and houses and all that, but we would go there to hang out. There was marijuana being smoked. You could smell it, and it would be passed around, and it wasn't like the stuff today that'll put you to the moon. It was more of ragweed, but it was around, and it was like when people came up, you weren't like, who are you? Or, oh my God, I'm scared. Or, what are you going to do? Or, we got this here. This is our... No, it was such... Our way of thinking as Americans then were the more the merrier. And that led me to telling my friend on the phone another story, because I went to the Keys recently. And I did this a few times too. No more than... See, the talking is what... starts off the vibration. In the Keys, before it was owned by all the rich people that came down there and bought up all the land and changed all the rules, and conks were riding around on bicycles. That's a local with a bicycle with a basket in the front. people would come down from West Palm, Miami, wherever. There weren't anything built on the side of the road. It was a barren highway, and you could pitch a tent. I'm talking about on the shoulder with a fire. And there was no problem with that. None. None at all. You pull over in your car now, and they'll come and arrest you. What are you doing here? Or you get killed. And I remember in high school, we went down during spring break, and we were just kids. But one of my buddies drove, and we got down to the Keys, and we saw these people hanging out. They had a little fire going. We pulled over, and we got out. And it wasn't like, who are you guys? It was like, what's happening? What's going on? It was the way it was. You remember that in the 70s? That, even in high school, we would go to keggers. You know what a kegger is? Everybody would find somebody that could buy a keg of beer, and we'd go out to the Trusty Woods, and people would, I don't know, get the word out of where it was, and, teenagers would be teenagers, and they would go out and bring their cups, and drink some beer. And it was just living, man. It was living completely different than, we don't even have those places. There's no anywhere to do that. The kids today, they don't even do those kinds of things. They're into other things. And the laws and, things were much different. But talking about like on the beach in California, how people were more trusting and they didn't worry about you were going to cut them, kill them. They weren't like heavy drugs. There were drugs, but, it wasn't anything bad. And down the Keys, that was bitching, because you just pull over and you meet people and throw a tent up. I remember my one story. I went down there with my buddies. We were high schoolers, and we pulled over. We met these people. The story I was just alluding to, and it's always windy there. It's always windy. I guess that's when I started hating the wind. I hate the wind in golf. I hate the wind when I had long hair and I used to be in the car business. I had this feathered hair, and I'd go out and I'd want to lift up like Donald Trump. I'm like, I got to walk into the wind like a sail. Mess up my hair. I ain't got no use for the wind. So I'm trying to put this tent up. Now, first of all, I'm not a very expert. I never put that many tents up in my life anyway. I'm just a high schooler. And I couldn't do it. It was funny. I don't know. Maybe we were drinking some beers or something too. But we just had a good time. And there's never a cross word. It also reminds me, going ahead a few years before things changed in our country, I used to live in Charlotte, and I became a NASCAR fan. I'm an eclectic individual. And when you're living in Charlotte, you got to go with NASCAR. So I started going to NASCAR races, and I would go and camp out in the infield. During the race, people would show up race day. They'd have their seats purchased, their ticket, their seat number would be there whenever they show up. Nobody's going to be in it. And they watch the race. They drink them some beers, maybe from the refreshment stand and all that. And they root on, go, and then they drive home at the end of the race. But if you stay in the infield, you get there 2 days before the race, and you're there. I think they throw you out the night of the race sometime, or at least the next morning. But you live and breathe that race, because you've got the Busch Car race. They used to call it the Busch Car races on Saturday, and then the Winston Cup, or the Cup cars, would race on Sunday. So you were there 2 days before and during the race, and then that night or the next morning. So you're there the best of 4 to 5 days. And people used to line up at the tunnel to go in under the railroad, under the track, to get to the infield. Now, half the infield is divided into the campers, trucks with platforms to stand on top of so you could see the track. And we would build those once we got in the infield. We would bring wood and things because you couldn't go under that tunnel with your platform built. So they'd bring cordless drills and screws and nails and hammers, and they would construct a, what do you call it? A platform or something like what they put up on the outside of buildings to get out there and work on the outside. What's that called? Scaffolding. And these guys could build them, you know. I never did that. I just show up with a tent, you know, my food and my drink, my grill, and that kind of thing. And I had a little Toyota pickup. But I had people always take me under their wing and say, hang with us. And some people would get there and line up at that tunnel 2 days before the 2 days that they allowed you to go in. And the same first cars, like at the Charlotte Motor Speedway, I learned were the same first 10 or 20 cars that line up for the last 10 years, previous 10 years, because they lived right there in Charlotte. And people would drive from Ohio. I mean, you would meet the best of the best. You talk about MAGA. You talking about Americans. You talking about good old boys. Whatever they had was yours, and whatever you had was theirs. Everybody shared. Everybody was cool. A lot of people drank. There was never crosswords. There was never anything. It was like-minded people doing what they love, even though a lot of them walking around. Dale Earnhardt was alive then, Dale Earnhardt Sr., and there was plenty of fans for Dale Earnhardt with those black shirts and that Chevy number 3. And they'd get ribbed from the Ford group, you know, hey, we like Dale Jarrett or some of the other names I can't remember now, but the old timey guys that aren't even racing now. Today, NASCAR, I couldn't tell you who any of those drivers are. And their sponsors have changed. And then trucks weren't even running in those days. You know, the Tundras and all that. But anyway, those were the good old days. And I lived them. I went to, when I got into the NASCAR, quick story, Daytona was the kickoff. That's like the Super Bowl of NASCAR. And the the second one, they'd have 2 races generally at each track, was the Firecracker 400 that ran on July 4th weekend. And they would make that not the Daytona 500 because it was too hot to run that many miles. It's a 2.5 mile track. So it's called the Firecracker 400. It was a 400 lap or mile because it's 2.5 miles around once. So they didn't do 400 laps. But anyway, I went to the Daytona and then I'm like, I can't get enough of this. I'm a little OCD myself. Good times. I did it all by myself. And many of those motorcycle trips I took on the Harley across country. That wasn't so many years ago in old timey days, but the first part of my story, talking about how people were, you know, less defensive and more, you know, long before cell phones, folks. I don't even think beepers were out when I'm talking about San Diego and camping out on the side of the road down in the Keys. Oh yeah, this is long before computer. So the only way we could communicate was through each other. And, you know, there were payphones in those days on every corner. But that's probably why people were a little more. But now they can communicate through these devices and through social media and find out things. And it's just changed. You know, it's definitely advantageous to have this technology. I mean, it's totally helped us a lot. But it's taken away so much of, you know, what the old-timey days were like. And I'm only blessed to say that I'm old enough and yet young enough to have experienced some of those years. That I grew up, and at least I started out young. I mean, I got married when I was 16. And I started driving and got on my own before, you know, I was even 18 or 21. So I started becoming adventurous and taking adventures years before a lot of people, you know, young adults. So I jumped in there during those end years when things were going on, like I just described, where people were less defensive of one another and, wanted to communicate more through like, hey, what's going on? Come on in. I mean, I used to go to this one place and hang out in high school that we played pinball. And it was a pinball. It was not an arcade room. They didn't have anything with, there was lights on the pinball machine, but there were marbles, steel balls. We didn't have any of that other, uh, like they got in casinos now. They look like video games. Everything has changed. And it's changed 100 times over. Not 2 times or 5 times or even 10 times. It's countless times over. And it continues to do that. And now, what do you hear now? Now you're hearing that what we heard about 2 years ago for the first time, I think it was about 2 years ago. AI. Like, what is AI? Artificial intelligence. Oh, they're going to shut down McDonald's. They're not going to be hiring anybody. Everybody's going to be coming in and ordering on. And you're like, they got a little bit of that order ahead. They got these things in there you can do, but not many people use them. And you've been in McDonald's lately. You got to stand there for a minute at the checker, at the cashier, for them to come over. They want you to use the stuff. And pretty soon, there won't be anybody in there dropping fries. It'll be AI. And so, and don't look for it to take too long now. What about these electric cars? All right, I'm going to the future. I want to stay back in old timey. I don't even like the way things are in the future for the most part. I miss that stuff because I'm older now and I remember. I'm like, when I was young, listening to my grandfather, talking about the old timey days. I'm like, you're old timey. Get with it. This is the 70s. But folks, I'm telling you, I'm not a downer and dislike. I mean, look, I'm able to hold a microphone and talk to a phone and you can hear me and we can share and we can reminisce. And so this is technology. But I do so wish that, and I know if you go to the South in certain parts of our country, people still do work and talk and act like that. They haven't progressed. You can still find, old timey. I use that word. Where people, refuse to do the new modern thing. But I've also noticed when I traveled across the country 3 times in this last year that little towns that I used to blink and pass through have been bought up by big corporate, and they've gone in there and they've put in business and housing developments and people, and it's mind-boggling. I'm telling you, I've been across this country so many times that when I get to a certain point, especially when I start getting out west, I remember towns that had one exit and you didn't really want to get off. They looked like, a ghost town. And you go by and you go, isn't that ghost town? Look at it now. I mean, housing tracts, subdivisions, stores, big fancy truck stops and all that stuff now. So development and progression has happened and left us behind. And here's what's sad, and I'll wrap up the video, is 27 minutes? Yeah, we'll make it about a 30-minute video. And the people my age, God willing, I live to be a lot older, will be able to still share memories and talk about it. But soon enough, I mean, think about people that were born 20 years ago. Oh my gosh. They don't ever remember a phone that had a cord on it. They won't know anything about old timey and the way high school was, and unless you watch Fast Times at Ridgemont High, that takes me right back to my day. That movie, every part of that movie, the cars, the people, the dress, the hairstyles, everything, and that's why I like that movie. It was really great, really great. Living in Lake Worth, Florida, in the 70s, going to Lake Worth High School was king. It was great. It was really great. And then living in San Diego I went back to San Diego where my mother lived, and that's when I got married at a early age and started working. Never finished school, and I'm a self-educated, a street smart person, and I've done well without going to college and things like that. I don't say quit school and don't go to college. I don't say that, but God looked after me. I made some mistakes, marrying young and all that, but hey, I wouldn't change anything. Looking at my life now, you know, it's actually entertaining to look back at it, and they were very, very good times. So when I went back to California after I left school, those king of times in Lake Worth is when I then still experienced, because that was 75 when I got in the car business and lied about my age. I said I was 18. I was only 16 or 17. And you had to be 18 to work. I just figured, hey, if they catch me, they'll just fire me, or at least I'm trying to work. I'm not trying to draw welfare or anything. And that never happened. And I continued to work and became very good in the car business. And, didn't make a lot of money, but for a kid, it was pretty good. They gave me a new car to drive, and I thought, man, this is great. Now I'm king here. And I lived in a place called Spring Valley and Lemon Grove. And it was like the San Diego times. It was still bell bottoms, long hair, and, I'm selling 75, 76 Corvettes at a Chevy store. I'm driving a Malibu, a 76 Monte Carlo, with the swivel out bucket seat. Remember those? The Monte Carlo with the 350 V8 in it. And it wasn't near as big. San Diego wasn't near as big as it is now. And Lake Worth, in the days I lived here, I watched them build I-95. There was US 1 federal highway, and that's it. That's it. They didn't have Congress Avenue. They didn't have 441 ended in Fort Lauderdale. It didn't even come up that way. And I-95 started up in Fort Pierce. And finally they made it and built it, and it connected to Fort Pierce. But I used to remember going to Jupiter, Florida, and in the 80s, like 80 and 81, it was still kind of old-timey days. I was very young. And there were sand dunes. I had an ATC three-wheeler. You remember those? They outlawed them. Three-wheeler. It had like balloon tires on them. I brought it back from San Diego to Lake Worth, Boynton Beach, actually. So I know I kind of popped around there a little bit. My brain's just kind of remembering. Oh, the furnace came on. Getting cold out there. I got to set down to where it just takes the chill off, and it's got to be getting chilly. I'm wearing these new sweats that I bought. It matches this. This is the top. I'll be wearing that in the morning when I go out to get some steps in, because it's going to be winter here for a couple of days. But life is still good. Like I say, I remember those old-timey days. I'm sure you got your old-timey days and states that you live in, or where you're watching me from, and where you grew up, or you live somewhere different now, and you used to live somewhere else, and you have your memories and your keggers and your party times in high school and your girlfriends, your boyfriends, that kind of thing. It was a great time. Music. Oh my gosh. Music was different, wasn't it? There was no such thing as whatever they're playing these days. And that's all I want to listen to now. I can't listen to the new music. Although I know all the new music, I've heard the new music, it can make my foot stomp. I get into it. I hear it on the cruises. I'm not, old fuddy-duddy. But let me hear some good Led Zeppelin and Boston and, Foreigner and other old classic. I don't know the names of the bands, actually, because I never was an expert on that. A lot of people knew songs. A lot of people collected dozens of albums. Oh, gosh, let me talk about that for a second. Do you remember before the technology. We had turntables, record players with albums. Oh, yeah. So, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Oh, man. How many times have you heard it, right? So, anyway, that's the evening chat about old timey and the old days. I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate the new subscribers I see on the channel. And if you are new, welcome. And if you're not new, thank you for staying with me, and thank you for all your comments. The comments have increased a little bit. If you see I answered some kind of near where you posted and I didn't answer yours, please forgive me. I read it. I just try to respond when what I can, but they have increased. But folks, I do spend time. I'm retired. When I'm not hustling out these videos, I do spend time to see what you're saying and to keep the comment section cleaned up. We don't need any of that other silliness in there. So I take care of that. But I read your comments, and all you regulars out there, and a lot of you have been, thank you so much for the well wishes for my health and the Merry Christmas. Don't forget my birthday, December 29th. You need to write that down? I'll wait. Just kidding. But, yeah, I like getting a happy birthday. I know you didn't forget. And I love those Merry Christmas wishes from all of you. I wish all of you nothing but the most prosperous, happiest, healthiest 2025. I hope you get your Social Security in 2025. You're going to be 62. I hope you just remember that nobody's promised tomorrow. Yesterday's gone, never to come back. We can think about it. We can remember it. But today's the day to crush it. Good night.